Yeah, I know the Titans got the number one pick, but the draft doesn't start with them. The draft starts at number 2 with Cleveland, and they might take a number 2 to be in Cleveland. We'll talk about that more here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, sir, everybody. It's your team every day here on Locked On NFL. We thank you for making us your first listen. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On NFL PM podcast that you can find each and every day wherever you get your podcast. Whether you watch or listen, make sure you tap in so you can become an everydayer. Of course, today's guest host is Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens, Locked On Squad Shows, all of that stuff. He's always all over the place, and he's going to be with us here today as usual. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet when it wins. It has to win. Make sure you check out FanDuel at FanDuel.com. Here's what we're going to run down today. At the end of the show, most likely trade up candidate. It has to be somebody that is going to get in the top 5. That means one of those teams is the team most likely to trade down, and I'll map all of that out and explain it to you when we get there. I think it's put up or shut up time for 2 teams. One of them Cincinnati, the other one is Miami. Miami is a little bit worse to me because there's more uncertainty with the quarterback that they've paid. We'll go over those 2 teams. But let's get to the top. Start in the AFC North, rather, where Ostreicher is very familiar with. I think the draft starts with Cleveland, man. I think that's when all of the suspense happens because I think Cam Ward is a done deal to Tennessee.
Yeah, and I'm glad I made that pick as GM last week. I guess I was fired from all 5 jobs since I'm not the GM again this week. But you're right. Cleveland is the place where there's the suspense of, is it Abdul Carter? Is it Shadeur Sanders? There are so many different ways that this could go, because obviously you have to be sold on Shadeur if he's your guy. If you're not, then you have another generational talent there, and Abdul Carter you can easily take and put next to Myles Garrett. So it's not like Cleveland is forced in that, especially because I think as good as Shadeur can be, I don't think that he's going to propel Cleveland to a Super Bowl this year. So if they don't feel like he's the guy, and they shouldn't force the pick just because he is the quarterback that will be available to them at 2, because you're right, Cam Ward will be going 1 to Tennessee, then you have another option. And then once Shadeur hits 3, if that happens, that's when things get really interesting, because obviously the Giants with Russ Wilson, with Jameis Winston, do they add him to the fold? And then if he goes to 4, we're going to be talking about that a little later, because that seems to be a spot where the Patriots aren't going to take him. So
yeah, that's a hot spot.
Trade up happens.
That's a hot spot. But see, it's already controversial because I can't believe you done took Travis Hunter out of that equation when a good pass rush helps a corner who can jump routes.
It's true.
And help a defense score points where the offense is going to struggle. And that same guy can give you big plays on offense, an offense that's probably going to lack those big plays, although they might think he's a little bit too similar in stature and style of play to Jerry Jeudy. But let's talk with Spencer. Let's listen to Spencer German. He's going to tell us something about the quarterback position that coming a day after Jimmy Haslam took responsibility for the worst signing in free agency history with Deshaun Watson. Spencer has a very, very interesting take that's going to probably lead us all the way to segment 2. Check this out.
Missing on a quarterback in the first round or the top 10 or even the top 5. It is not the death sentence. It is not this kiss of death that it used to be in the NFL. It's easier than ever to pivot out of a missed quarterback, because if you miss and you stink again, you suck again, you end up right back in the same place with an opportunity to draft a different quarterback that's at the top of a class and try it all over again. What's so bad about that? And the biggest pushback I get is, well, if they draft a quarterback and he's a bust, everyone gets fired. They start all over with a new staff that's going to strip it all down, and it's going to take 3 years to rebuild the Browns back up to being a contender. Guess what? I got news for you. If the Browns take Abdul Carter and then they start the year with Kirk Cousins or Carson Wentz or Kenny Pickett, or they draft a rookie who they're hoping that later that they hope turns out that they're sort of banking or hoping in, wishing on a hope and a prayer, turns out to be a great quarterback, and they finish with 4 wins next year anyway. Everyone's getting fired regardless of if they took Abdul Carter and did the quote-unquote right thing. And then guess what? A new staff is coming in, and that staff could still decide to hit the rebuild button. That staff could still decide we're going to tear it all down to the studs, start all over, get our own quarterback, and it could take 3 years to be competed again. That's just the reality of the situation. You could ultimately end up in the exact same place.
All right, he's correct. And let me tell you why he's correct and why him being correct still doesn't matter. Sam Bradford was the last quarterback to get $50-some-odd million and be one of the highest paid players as the number 1 overall pick. They went to a rookie salary cap. That's the reason why this is important, because you can't get guys to give up a top 5 pick for an all-pro in a trade. They won't do it. And the reason why they won't do it, well, let me rephrase that. If they already know that it's a top 5 pick, because Cleveland actually did give up a whole bunch of picks for Deshaun Watson. That was a disaster. But they probably thought Deshaun was going to have them in the playoffs every year when they did that. So folks might say, how come it doesn't matter if you miss on a top 5 pick and you can just reboot it, a la whoever selected Brandon Weeden at 22 moved on. Whoever selected Kenny Pickett at 17, they moved on. Whoever selected Josh Rosen, they moved on, and they went and got another quarterback right after that. But that's not the point. The point is general managers put so high of a value on those early picks, first-round picks in general, but yet and still now Spencer's saying it doesn't matter if you miss on one. Here's why. It's because if you trade for a player and give up multiple first-round picks, you're paying that player. If you don't and you mess up with that first-round pick, he ain't making that much money. It's all about money. It's all about finances. It's all about getting the cheapest labor.
You hate to waste the asset, obviously, especially, when we talk about maybe trading back even to get much more future draft capital. I mean, you have to have a good scouting department. You have to be sure that the guy early is your guy. But you're right, where what made the Deshaun Watson move so bad was because of the contract, was because of the draft capital given up, among many other reasons. And it was one of the worst trades we've ever seen. It was probably the worst trade we've ever seen, just based off of return value, everything that came with Deshaun Watson at the time, and just everything they gave up. But if Shadeur Sanders is not the guy at 2, they pick him, and all of a sudden in 2 years, you're questioning whether he can even start at the NFL level. Well, the Jets and Zach Wilson, Zach Wilson was the number 2 pick a couple of years ago. That didn't work out. The Jets moved on. They brought in Aaron Rodgers, and of course that didn't work out either. But the point still stands of they could pivot easier than having that Deshaun Watson contract on your roster, taking up cap space, taking up a starting spot, or just a backup spot. It messes with your roster. It messes with your construction. So I understand the sentiment, but again, you hate to waste the asset is the other big part of this too.
You do. Now, let me clarify this, because I think what happens is we start talking about this and everything happens in absolutes. I think this morning I heard Matt Hasselbeck, I heard a clip where he compared Shadeur Sanders. He says he's like Andy Dalton, right? Well, you know what you can do with Andy Dalton? He ain't a great quarterback. He's good, solid. You can make the playoffs with Andy Dalton. But you know what could happen? Abdul Carter could lead the league or be second in the league in sacks with Myles Garrett, or Travis Hunter could be an all-pro, and you could still miss the playoffs because you don't have a quarterback. And that's what makes that position so valuable. So getting an above-average quarterback may take your team further than getting an all-pro defensive player. But the goal when you pick somebody at number 2 is to win a Super Bowl. And the question is, do you think Shadeur Sanders is that or not? Because sometimes there are certain guys that can get you to a certain point, like Jared Goff, but he doesn't have the goods to get you over the hump. Now, Detroit doesn't know that, but it seems like the Rams certainly did.
I think that, again, part of the reason these teams get into trouble, and some teams have this mindset, others don't, is because they see the hole at quarterback on their roster, and we'll just stick with quarterback, but it applies to a lot of positions. and they say, we have to take a quarterback. It doesn't matter where the guy is ranked, and you can look at some of the other like where does Jackson Dart go? Does he go higher than expected because the team looks at the quarterback class after Cam Ward and Shadeur Sanders go, and they're like, well, now we're panicking because we need a quarterback, and Jackson Dart is the next guy that we like, or is it Jalen Milroe? It's the same conversation. Where do you pick a guy because you need the position, and where do you pick a guy because they actually deserve to be picked at that spot? And so it's like teams that we've talked about in the past. I mean, me covering the Ravens, and we'll get into it about, how they approach their draft. It's, hey, they might need a certain position. But if there's not a guy worthy of their pick at that position available on the board, they will not pick that position until they feel like there's a guy worthy on the board, and they will take best player available. And so when you get to these earlier selections, it becomes a bit more of an interesting conversation because everybody wants to take the quarterback. Everybody feels like that's where the value is, and everybody wants to have that star, and plus you can take that conversation further of everybody wants it to be the next CJ Stroud year one or next Jayden Daniels year one. There's no room for it to be an Anthony Richardson who needs development. You have to be that guy in year one, or else you're considered, is this guy really what it takes? Does he have what it takes at the NFL level? So there are so many conversations around the quarterback position, or the rookie quarterback position, especially as that has evolved over the years.
I think back, Patrick Mahomes didn't start but 1 or 2 games his rookie year. Josh Allen was an absolute disaster. Sometimes they need to take a look at the past and understand that just because it takes a little time doesn't mean that the dude or the player can't end up being a very, very good player. And this is the problem when you have coaches picking to save their job instead of doing what's right for the franchise. We're going to talk about the Dolphins, and we'll mention the Bengals. It's put up or shut up time. And Miami's probably going to be in the same situation everybody else is because of the way they've kind of built their team up. We'll discuss that and more in the second segment of Locked On NFL. All right, today's show is sponsored and brought to you by Monarch Money. If you ever check your bank account and wonder, man, where did all my money go? Between dining out and online shopping and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. I'm telling you, man, there's surprising insights you can get because when I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget a little smarter and I save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL, all one word, for half off your first year. All right, segment dos. I think that's the way you say it. I think you put the number first in Spanish. You go dos and then however you say segment. But this is the way it is, man. Here on Locked On NFL, we're having some fun here, looking around at hair brackets. Who has the best hair? One guy on Locked On the NFL Network, you're looking at him, Kevin Ostreicher has the best hair. Somebody else has some real nice hair, man, and you about to see him too. It's my man Kyle Krabs. He's talking about possible trade scenarios for the Miami Dolphins. They sure need some help, but I like what he's done here. He has made a big board of talent and need for Miami, and he's actually slotted people. I want you to listen to how he's done it because this is what I've said for a long time that NFL people really, really do. They still keep their big board for trades and for fits and, okay, who could they be coming up to get? But they also have their own board, and this is what leads teams to either going up or coming back. Listen to how Kyle Krabs frames this.
I have almost 250 players graded at this point. We're going to look at the top 16 after I've tailored all of the positions for the Dolphins. Most of these players, not all of them, but most of these players are players that we looked at this past week on Locked On Dolphins. So if I were to stack my board, tailoring my universal grades for the Dolphins, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, 1-2. Shouldn't be a real big surprise there. But then you have names like Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State, dealing with a patellar tendon tear that has a medical concern, and that this, if you're watching on YouTube, his name in yellow is an indicator that there's an injury question with the player. That might be enough in a real life situation to take him off the board for the Dolphins. I can't make that determination for myself, and I'm grading to have all the players reflected. So Josh Simmons, very highly ranked, so much so he actually is tied with Jahdae Barron, the corner defensive back from Texas. And then Mason Graham finishes out the top 5. Those are my top 5 players, taking my universal grades for this draft class and putting filters on that are meant to tailor the positional or needs to execute the offense.
I like it. I love the way he did that. And I love the fact that he's taking so much time to really, really focus on the Miami Dolphins' individual needs, but not downplaying best possible player at the position, or BPA, when they're available to Miami when they pick. But Miami, I hope the brass in Miami is doing their due diligence the way Kyle is, because I'm looking at their roster, and my man Matt Williamson, who you're going to hear from here in a little bit, he always says they got too many Ferraris and not enough dump trucks. And the thing that lame up coaches don't want to do, and I think if they don't do well this year, that's exactly what you're looking at. It's like, if you're going to get fired if you don't do a good job, they always look for the people that want to score touchdowns, bro. They don't want the infrastructure guys, the guys that could really help the franchise long term, as we talked about in the first segment. What's going on with Miami and probably Cincinnati? They're in the same boat, but I put Miami a little bit above them because there's more uncertainty about Tua. This is a critical offseason for Miami and Cincinnati, isn't it?
It's huge for both those teams. And, I know we've talked about it before, Wig, where Mike McDaniel, I wouldn't have been shocked if he was let go this offseason because of the expectations Miami has had and the disappointment that it's been. And obviously, yes, they've had to deal with the uncertainty surrounding Tua for the last handful of seasons, and that is certainly a factor. But, there is volatility with Tyreek Hill's situation. Is he going to be on the roster come week 1 next year? And for a team that, again, they've signed big names, it feels like they've gone big name hunting for the last handful of years, and it hasn't come together for them, where every season it feels like we're talking about them. Oh, Buffalo's this team that's going to win the AFC East, but Miami, watch out for Miami, and then it never happens. And then it's the same thing with the Bengals, where you have Joe Burrow, you have Jamar Chase, you have T. Higgins. That's obviously your big 3, but defensively, you have to hope that Trey Hendrickson comes back, and even Trey Hendrickson might not save this defense with, how it performed last season, because we saw firsthand how Trey Hendrickson was a beast, and it didn't really matter on Cincinnati's defense. So you have good teams that are, they're solid. They might miss the playoffs by a game. They might be the 7 or the 6 seed, but that's not what teams are shooting for. That's not what the goal is. The goal is to make the playoffs consistently, compete for a Super Bowl consistently, and obviously the big goal is to win the Super Bowl. And yes, Zach Taylor, he made the Super Bowl early in his Cincinnati tenure, but this is a what have you done for me lately league, and right now Zach Taylor hasn't done much of anything in Cincinnati. Same with Mike McDaniel in Miami.
You're absolutely right. And I was on social media earlier, and I drew a parallel between Miami and Cincinnati, and someone says, well, the Bengals, they've invested all of their money at skill positions, and it hasn't helped them. And they invested all of their resources at skill positions. I said, that's not true. They didn't pay Jamar Chase until this year. They didn't pay T. Higgins outside of that 1 year on the franchise tag until this year. They haven't played a game with them playing those 2 guys, and they let Joe Mixon go. This is the thing. They went to the Super Bowl with Joe Burrow in his second year, T. Higgins in his second year, and Jamar Chase in his first year. Since then, this is when they should have been building infrastructure. And the thing about the Bengals is they tried, but they missed. They didn't draft another receiver. They didn't draft another quarterback. They didn't draft another running back early. They drafted one cornerback, and that's Taylor Britt in like the 3rd or 4th round. They have tried to do the right thing, but they have picked the wrong people. And this is what I keep telling folks over and over again. Stop worrying about positions and squares and slots, and actually understand that the people you're going to pick on draft day have character, heartbeats. They are human beings. You need to start getting the right people for your organization, not just drafting the right positions. All right, we're going to talk about trades. And we're going to talk about New England. And I'm glad you mentioned it because I said the draft starts with Cleveland, who I think is going to take Shadeur, by the way. And I think he's going to be better than Andy Dalton, by the way. It's still a matter of trying to position yourself to get the absolute best value. And I'll use an example about the Jacksonville Jaguars from just last season to show you how you sometimes need a little bit of luck to do that. We'll talk about that more here on Locked On NFL. But first, I got to let you know about today's sponsor, which is FanDuel. March Madness is here. And FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before, and it is the Final Four. How about that rhyming? Never before, because it's the Final Four. And there's 4 number 1 seeds in the Final Four, and everybody is ready for it. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who gets to cut down those nets next Monday night. Picking your favorites is easy. If you got your eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. I would say right now the biggest underdog is probably Houston. That's the way I'll go with it. Just visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all Final Four long. Make your picks on FanDuel and get you some of that Skrilla. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com. All right, KO, here we go. We're going to talk about trades. Who is the best candidate to come up and down? And I think this has a scheme issue to do with it. I said I was going to use this example. Last year, the Jaguars picked, I think, 17th or something like that. They traded down. They went back to 20th, got Brian Thomas Jr. I think he was the best offensive rookie other than Jayden Daniels in the National Football League. They almost missed out, though. Now, they do have an extra 3rd and a 4th. Thank you, Trent Baalke, for doing that. It really wasn't worth it because I heard the Miami Dolphins almost took Brian Thomas Jr. because they needed a bigger receiver to go with their receiving core. There you go again, adding another Ferrari. But sometimes you need a little bit of luck. I want you to hear the Peacock and Williamson guys talk about, from the Peacock and Williamson podcast, of course, Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson, our Friday guest here, how trades and what scheme a team runs can affect draft night.
All right, Matt, let's get into this thing. And I think it's a fascinating draft. And I think one of the reasons it fascinates me the most is because of this question by Dave. And he says, does the lack of blue chip players in the first round this year make draft day trades more or less likely? And I want to get your opinions on the trade part of that question.
Is it a coincidence that all 32 teams currently own their 32 picks? You know, I mean, by this time last year, give or take, Houston had traded out of the first round, not even knowing what was going to be there for them. I mean, would teams have been more or less likely to trade their first round pick for a player like a DK Metcalf type trade, but a bigger one if those picks were more valuable? You know, would Tyreek Hill ended up on the Chiefs if the Miami valued first round picks more this year? You know what I mean? Or vice versa. And again, I know you bring it back to the Niners, I bring it back to the Steelers, but because they traded DK Metcalf, the Steelers are a draft pick short. And so often on my Steelers show, we talk about at 21 where they pick, could they trade down 5, 6 spots and pick up a day 2 pick?
Very, very interesting stuff. What Williamson said, I would suggest you guys go over and watch the Peacock and Williamson show. Something else they said in there within a minute of that was the 3-4 teams, and Ostreicher, you know this very well, the teams that run a 3-4 or any sort of odd, freaky type front where they depend on players and their ability as opposed to alignment, man, they're lucky in this draft because there are a lot of stand-up guys like Easy Ruaku from Boston College. A lot of guys like that. And then the safety, Emin Worry, kid from South Carolina. There's a lot of little junky, I call them junky, but not junky because they're not good, but players like that are just football players that may not fit a regular standard base 4-3 scheme, and they're just going to sit there and wait. And that's going to lead me to talk about another team in just a second. But do you, as a team that runs the kind of stuff that I'm sitting there talking about, where it's not so much of a shell, do you think you have an advantage in the draft because you have a wider array of players that you can take?
Yeah, I think so. And again, for the draft in particular and how the Ravens do things and how some of these other teams do things as well, it's, best player available, which truly means you just take a talented guy and you figure the rest out later, where that's how you evaluate. And honestly, you could maybe even luck yourself into better situations later in the draft. An example for Baltimore is last year, where everybody was talking about how they needed an offensive lineman. They lost 3 starters, and it's like, well, maybe Tyler Guyton, or maybe a guy falls to them in 20, they were 30 last year. And then a guy doesn't fall to them. And so instead of forcing a pick on an offensive lineman that they probably had a second round grade on, they took Nate Wiggins, who turned out to be a really good corner for them. And then Roger Rosengarten falls in their laps at their second round pick, who turned out to be a super solid offensive lineman and looks to have a bright future ahead of him. So sometimes you just luck into those guys, but if you force it and you just pick based off of need in general, that can work for you sometimes, but it's not going to give you the best value in the draft. And while it might feel good to say, hey, we need a right tackle, here's a right tackle that might not be a first rounder, but is a second rounder. Now we have him, might feel good in that moment. But when that guy starts playing like a second rounder and you use the first rounder on him, that's when the problems arise. So I think Baltimore and those teams do it right. Obviously, you don't want to Baltimore's not going to take a quarterback because they have Lamar Jackson in the first round. That's not what they're going to do, but it's within reason where you can align guys in different positions. Maybe a veteran leaves in free agency next year and you can slot that guy in. It's a puzzle. It's an intricate puzzle. I think Baltimore and other teams do a good job at it, but as we know, others don't.
Yep, others don't. A team that, ironically, over the last 20 years has been boom or bust. They either draft a Hall of Famer or they draft some kid you never heard of before, or the New England Patriots. They do it all the time. Sometimes they miss. A lot of times they hit. When they hit really, really big, of course. And, we know the names throughout the years: Brady, Richard Seymour, Teddy Bruschi. They've hit on a Ty Law. I mean, we could go on and on. But there's been a lot of misses in New England, too. Now with Mike Vrabel taking over, I think they're in the catbird seat. And I believe if it goes quarterback, Travis Hunter's going number 3. And then that next pick from New England at number 4 is the place that is where there's a most likely trade-up candidate. I want you to hear Mike Debate talk about the Patriots.
New England Patriots head coach Mike Vrabel had a lot to say on Monday morning at the NFL meetings. Did he provide enough insight to decipher the team's plans for the upcoming NFL draft? Let's start with the defense, because despite the addition of Milton Williams to this front seven, despite the addition of linebackers such as Jack Gibbons and Rob Spillane, Carlton Davis III coming in and bolstering that secondary, probably the biggest story, I think, on everyone's mind when it comes to the New England Patriots defense is the health of defensive tackle Christian Barmore. Christian is beloved in this area. He's truly one of the best defenders the Patriots have on this roster. Mm-hmm. And because of the scary nature of the health issues he's had recently, Murph, a lot of people are wondering what's going to be his status for 2025. Well, Mike Vrabel actually had a bit of good news for the New England Patriots and their fans, and most of all, for Christian Barmore himself. Christian was limited to only 4 games last year due to blood clots, and a lot of people were wondering, could this be the end of Christian Barmore on a football field? Mike lent some additional content to Barmore's situation in saying, quote, "By all accounts, I think he's going to participate in the voluntary offseason program. He popped in the other day to see the doctors. When he walked into the training room, all the trainers and just his energy, his presence, I know that he's feeling better."
Now listen to me. I think Abdul Carter's a prospect. But sitting there at number 4, if they have any questions about Barmore, and even though they got Milton Williams, you could still see them looking at Mason Graham going, hey, big head. You could even look at them looking at Mike Green saying, oh, I think if we could get another first-round pick, if you could do what Houston did to Arizona a few years ago and make that trade, and somebody can come up and get that guy, and then you can drop back if you're Arizona, I think that would be a fabulous move for them. If they got an extra second this year and a first next year, if they go back to, say, 12, 13, somebody wants Genty, somebody wants Abdul Carter comes up, the Patriots could get Mike Green, could target an offensive lineman a little bit later, could be in that Josh Simmons category, or could be in that area where they could still get a really, really good player. They could really turn this draft upside down. I think they are the most likely team to accept the trade outside of the top 10, sitting at number 4.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that conversation becomes a lot louder if Shadeur is still available. But, you have, I guess, your big four. And Cam Ward is already locked into Tennessee, it feels like. So we're kind of taking that off the board. But with Sanders, with Carter, and with Hunter, whichever one of those three do not go in the top 3 picks, there are going to be teams that want to move up. And the Patriots have that golden ticket to say, hey, and they could honestly get whatever they wanted for it, if we're being honest, because you have, I think, 3 players that could instantly change a franchise if it all works out for them. And for the Patriots, they don't yes, it'd be great to have a top 4 pick on this roster, but they don't need that right now. They can go and collect future assets with Drake May in year 2, build out their roster. And you're right, Wig, not even drop that far in the grand scheme of things and still get a really talented player, whether they move back 4 spots, 6 spots, 8 spots, whatever it is. And then you maybe pick up an extra first, an extra second, couple future picks. That would really help them out. So while I think there are plenty of paths where they can take a Hunter or a Carter or any of those guys, there are a lot of other options for them that I think make a lot of sense.
One thing we forget in the draft, we don't know who these teams really, really covet from the meetings, talking with the guidance counselors and the parking attendant at these kids' college. We don't know that. The other thing we don't know, there's something that we do know. When you look at the guys who are good traditionally or historically, it's never in the order that we all thought. There's always a second, third, fourth, and a couple of fifth round that turn out to be very, very good. Hopefully, New England can set their sights on one of them guys, move back, maybe make the fan base a little bit angry on draft night, but it still works out on the football field. I'll tell you what, you want to know more about it? Click in the Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parsons and Coach Keith Sanchez, because you will find out about those prospects that you don't hear from or hear about and know much about. And you can do it from 2 of the best in the industry. Make sure you check that out wherever you get your podcast, whether you watch or listen. Kevin Ostreicher, get to it. We'll see you here next Tuesday. And for everybody else, thanks for joining us here on Locked On NFL.